interview with Glad Willis, 2nd of September 1994 at Burwood. Hello Glad, it's really nice to meet you.
Pleased to meet you too.
I believe that you grew up in King's Cross.
Yes, I did. We lived at number 1 Victoria Street. The house's name was Iolanthe, and I was born at St Margaret's Hospital, but we lived there.
What year were you born?
Born in 1917, and the first thing I remember there is going out the gate and with my sister. I would be about 2 years of age, and the little boy 2 doors away had a bad temper, and he threw down a bucket which ricocheted and cut my nose just there, and I bear that scar to this day. We were very poor because my father had left us, and my sisters had to go to work, but that was after I was 2, but before that we used to, what will I say, we used to sort of, trust me, we lived there, and it was very hot at times. I remember getting the measles there. I remember the cockroaches coming out of the big vent that was in the street nearby. We looked down on the wharves and could see all the events going on.
What kind of house was Iolanthe?
It was a terrace house.
And was it divided into apartments, or was it...?
No, it was just a house on its own. Downstairs was the drawing room, lounge room with the old fuel stove and kitchen. The laundry was down the back, and the toilet would have been down the back. You went upstairs, and there was a division upstairs. One went to the major front room, and the other went to the other bedrooms. I think there were 2 bedrooms there. I think there were 3 bedrooms, but we slept in double beds, and that's what I did practically all my life. We slept in double beds, and today the connotation of sleeping with women in double beds was so innocent in those days.
There were 4 girls in the family, is that right?
Yes, 4 girls, yes. My mother had lost 2 girls, about 4 years of age, 4 months and 6 months.
What from?
She doesn't know whether they were blue babies or what they were. She used to say that one baby, May, had the look of heaven in her eyes, and she knew she'd never rear her. And the 2 boys were stillborn, and I was a twin, and my cord had strangled my twin brother, and Mum carried that baby, dead baby, from 3 months to the final, and so therefore it was touch and go if I was going to live. The only thing she had with carrying the dead baby was the fact that she came out in sores, and but otherwise, until I came into the world and sort of dragged the baby out at the same time. So my sister at that time used to go to Sydney Girls High, which was where Davy Jones's is now, and we used to walk through Woolloomooloo. Mum used to take me in her arms, and we'd go through Woolloomooloo to the gardens, the rose gardens behind the Registrar General's, and she would sit there and wait for my daughter, for my sister, elder sister Nell, to come home, because it was not safe to walk through Woolloomooloo because of the type of sailors that habited the area. So they'd come across and up the I think it's Macalane steps, and up to the house there. So that was just one of the things that sort of happened. And when I was 6, we moved to King's Court, which was at Darlinghurst, and my sisters were then working, and I then was sent to school to St John's Grammar School, which was part of St John's church. It was an old stone edifice, which is still standing, as far as I know today. And
what suburb's that?
In Darlinghurst.
Oh, Darlinghurst, right.
In Darlinghurst Road.
Right.
And so I got croup and was in bed the whole winter for croup. And then we moved to Bondi, mainly for my health. Mum took me out one day, saw it was lovely and sunny, and then she sort of decided, right. So I started school at North Bondi School when I was 7, which I had to pick up. But I felt that, after a few months I was back up into my own age group. But then we came back. Mr Morrison was thinking of opening a cake shop in the Cross, and with my sister working in his office, and my other sister Jean, who could not work for a boss, Mum decided, well, she'd go into the cake shop, and that would occupy Jean, and who was the personality piece of our family, and she would sort of be entertained, or entertain herself. And so we signed the lease, and what would you say? We signed the lease, and then eventually we moved back to Springfield Avenue, and we lived in Springfield Avenue till about 1935. We changed residences in Springfield Avenue, and at the time, Springfield Avenue, Springfield House was a beautiful old home, and where on the corner, once on the, what would you say, on the eastern side of Springfield, the entrance of Springfield Avenue from Darlinghurst Road, which was all lawns and with sort of an ordinary fence, that was all, they built that building that went to the lane. I don't know the name of the lane, but that building is there. And on the opposite side, on the other corner, I think was Dr. Hall. It was an ordinary 2-storey residence, but it was facing into Darlinghurst Road. But Springfield House used to play on the lawns. And the great thing in my life is when the Salvation Army used to come around on a Sunday morning with their singing and timbrels and giving out texts. That was the wonderful thing. You got a text, so you knelt and you sang with them, so you could get a text. I mean, and so that was just one of the things that sort of, this is in my early years, from 9 or 10, sort of 8, 9 or 10 I would have been in that era.
But going back to when you were at Lanthe,
yes.
Did your mother rent that house?
Yes, we rented it.
And from what you've said, this is just going back a little bit, and what you're saying to follow up, your mother must have had, 7 or 8 pregnancies. Did you have that many?
Yes, plus miscarriages.
Really?
Yes. And then my father got another woman.
And do you know anything about why he left? Or
he wanted a son.
That's right.
He wanted a son. He madly wanted a son. And God never gave him the son.
Because there were 3 that miscarried or died. Yes.
Yes. The 3 were stillborn. And the other woman had a daughter. So she's round about my age.
So he went off with a much younger.
No, he was when I was born. My birth certificate states he was a moving picture theatre manager.
Was he really?
That's right, for the Lyceum Theatre, for Sir Benjamin Fuller. And the lady in his life worked at the Lyceum Theatre.
Right.
So that was how that occurred. And she promised him a son. But in the end, Mum couldn't take his infidelity. So we struggled.
So it must have been. Did your mother ask him to leave, or?
I don't really know. My sisters hated him. Right. You know, they never forgave him for the way he used to treat my mother in the end, because he had a guilt complex. He had a wife and children, and just before he died, he rang up and asked my mother to forgive him. But being a Catholic, although we weren't, he sort of had the reason, well, my mother reckoned the reason was that he'd been so indoctrinated by the priests that he'd go to hell.
Yes.
But, you know, that was the sort of thing that made him ring up, and she said, well, look, I forgive you because I've got our children and grandchildren around me, so... But we really never let him see our children. That was one thing he never saw.
And how old were your older sisters? How old when this happened? Say,
one was 10 years older, one was 14, and one was 15.
Oh, right.
So there was 10 years in the break when Mum lost everybody.
Right, and so you were very much the baby.
I had 4 mothers.
Oh gosh.
You know, children should be seen and not heard. I grew up very naive, very insecure in lots of ways. And I used to sort of wander around and entertain myself, and that's probably why I'm contented in my old age, because I used to be alone to a degree.
And how did your mother survive with 4 children? I suppose it was...
Well, they were older. See, they left school and went to work. And so she was a very good manager. So she would sort of... everybody had to put their money down on the table and give pocket money. She would go to the sales and buy sort of 3 lots of materials, 3 dressing gowns, 3 of different colours, and my elder sister had first choice, Jean had the next, and I had the leftovers. And often I used to love what my sisters got, whether that was being perverse or...
Well, that would have been being passed down to you, because you would have been so much smaller.
Yes. I got the hand-me-downs. Yeah, oh, well and truly. But sometimes the hand-me-downs were very nice. But,
you would have got it from 3 people, depending on how many...
Depending, but you never felt that you really had your own personality in things. We all had to make our own clothes. We're taught from very early... Well, we didn't have many clothes. We had a good frock that you wore to Sunday school and that, and you had another frock. And, you really only had 2 frocks. 3 at the main, and you know, you'd wash them out and sometimes iron them dry. So I can remember going to school and washing them the night before, and they weren't properly dry in the morning, and ironing them dry to wear.
You know, around at Olanthi where you were living, I mean, I know you were very young. How old were you when you left there?
6.
So was that a residential neighbourhood? Were there families there? What sort of people lived in that neighbourhood?
It was a residential. There were lots of rooms let, but it was mainly purely a residential area. You would hear the voices of the drunks coming up from down below near the wharves. But where we were, we had good neighbours, and they often used to look after me, so much so that when my mother did go and get a little job for a while, this lady who became my godmother minded me, and I used to call her more mummy. And I was very, very fond of Mrs. Donovan, you know, sort of, that was her name. And so sort of, we had a very quiet life there because we had no money, and we sort of, Mum was a terrific manager, and so, and we were really what you'd call genteel poverty. Mum would never go to anybody or cry poor or anything like that. She had an intense pride.
Had you been well off when your father was there?
Well, yeah, well, relatively. I mean, in the 1900s, like sort of when she married him, and round, he was getting about £3 a week, which was very, very good money. And Mum used to have a nurse. I know nurse used to come in. Mum often used to speak of nurse. I don't know her other name. And we'd been relatively all right till he played up.
Mm. And the other people, were there lots of kids in the neighbourhood?
Not many.
Why is that?
Well, I think they were sort of at that stage starting to get out into the suburbs. The main suburbs that seemed to have lots of children were Surrey Hills, Woolloomooloo, Redfern. They were the places where Balmain, they were where a lot of the ordinary working families were. Where we lived, it seemed to be either extremely rich or extremely poor. There was no in the middle. You'd be living next door to somebody who was extremely wealthy, and I mean that went on even in when we lived in Corinthia in the Depression years. We had people like the Mrs. Trelaw of the Trelaws of Tamworth, Jim Carr used to have his own. They were city flats that they came, and he had a chauffeur and a maid, and one of the Lowe's of Lowe's Limited had one of the flats there. So even though there were 40 flats, like this is coming back to a later period, in the late 20s, they were sort of extremely rich, but nobody really mixed around those areas. You know, and Mum was very reserved, so I felt that she had so much of a tragedy in her life that she, different to me, who I talk like mad, she was the opposite. So,
why do you think that, were you living at Ollanthe when your father left, or did she move there after this?
No, he was there. They moved to the Ollanthe from Double Bay before I was born. Mum he went away and he came back, and Mumta gave him quite a few times, and I just happened to be an accident. Mm. So that was just one of those things that
so she was living there because
with the children,
because that was the house that you were living in.
They were living in. It had been more or less the home. Yes, the people that owned it, I think their name was Press. And Mrs. Donovan, I think, was 2 doors away, was related to the Presses. But whatever happened, we always had a comfortable home. Even if we didn't have money, Mum would make the rugs. She'd buy sacking, like that you get flour and that in. She'd bleach it, and then she'd buy cheap wool and make the rugs, and the hall rugs were made by Mum. We always had a good lounge and a good Wilton carpet, lino everywhere else, but that was the feature of the day. But Mum always believed in not spending much money but getting quality. So I mean, we always had,
and she kept up appearances.
Oh yes, my sisters were known as the three well-dressed Coburn girls, you know, but you know, sort of, and to this day I feel I I was always the young one that was never tidy, that was always dirty, that was always lazy, and I was lazy. And so, whereas the others were, you know, well, it was the gay 20s, so what else would you... By the time I was growing up, the gay 20s were well and truly on, and they were having a ball. My sisters really had a ball in those years. When I came through with the Depression, there was no ball. So, you know, there were parties and things like that. But they'd go away on holidays and they'd meet people. It was...
Where did they work?
One worked at Morrison's cake shop. She was...
Tell me about this, sorry. Tell me about this Morrison, and everyone talks about Morrison's cake shop and Mr. Morrison.
Yeah.
And is he a well-known figure? Or?
Yes, he was. I can't remember what happened, but Mr. Morrison opened this cake shop, and the factory was in Willara, off Queen Street. And I know, I have an idea I might have a photo of that street somewhere. I don't know. And he sort of, my sister was the chief clerk there, and she worked there for all the time. But once the business was gone, and he got a lady love, I don't know whether I should say that, was the girl that worked under her. She went to hospital, came back, and got a letter while she was away on holidays to say her job was gone, which was a pretty rotten thing to do.
I mean, she went, did she have an abortion?
No, my sister had an operation.
Oh, your sister had an operation.
My sister had an operation, a throat operation, tonsil operation, which she nearly died. And she went away for a holiday. Well, if she'd known she was going to lose the job, she wouldn't have. And later on, she found that the girl underneath her had become the girl that worked underneath her had become very, very friendly with Mr. Morrison.
Oh, right. And
his cakes were first class.
Right.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the quality you'd get at David Jones's and things like that. Right. Always. I don't know whether he didn't supply David Jones's or that for cakes. He had a wide area of cakes, like local shops would get sort of a small amount of cakes. But we used to with the shop.
Now, how did it come about that your mother? So he set up a shop in.
No, he didn't set it up. He wanted a thing there, and he found the shop, and Mum ran it. It was her business. It wasn't Mr. Morrison's. But everybody thought that Morrison's owned the shop, but he did not own the shop. We owned the shop.
Right, but you sold Morrison's cakes.
We were agents for Morrison's cakes, like sort of McDonald's do today. I can't think of the name of what they... Franchise. We really had a franchise for Morrison's cakes. That's really what it was.
And did that come about after your sister had left working at the factory?
No. My sister, it was when the Depression hit, and we got rid of the shop that my sister lost the job.
Oh, I see.
She worked there and sort of knew that he was looking for someone to open a cake shop. So, right. And we did that because of my other sister not working for a boss.
Oh, yes. And you thought, and so the family sort of run it. Your mother?
Yes, my mother and my sister Jean, or Jane as she really was, and then we had a cook and a waitress. And
what was your mother's name? Sorry,
Caroline Mary Coburn. Right. Yes, and she ran it, and Jean, of course, sort of worked there. We had many interesting people come through the shop in those days, and so.
And you were a child then?
I was a child. I was to be seen and not heard. I was never allowed to serve in the shop. When I came home from school, I had to go down the back. I could sit down the back of the shop, which was a very long shop.
Did they have tables? And
we had grey tables and
to serve coffee or tea or what?
Light refreshments, yes, sort of pie and mashed potato, because we'd get the pies from Morrison's Pies, and we'd have cakes and sort of tea and coffee and milkshakes, and we sold chocolates. And
was it an elegant sort of?
Yes, it really was, because you can imagine grey tables and grey chairs, and then with the glass, like the tables had lead glass tops, and under the lead glass tops were flowers, paper cut out flowers that sort of were under it, that it gave sort of the flowery effect with the grey tables and chairs. In my kitchen there, if you look, you'll see that I've got one bench under glass, and it's got the material the same as the curtains. That idea had come from Mum's shop. Yes.
She must have been very resourceful to put that together.
Oh yes, she was a very clever woman. She really... See, the point was, my father could have become something if he'd listened to her, but he didn't, And I think my mother was too clever. My father was a clever man, but Mum was more clever in a different way. She was more resourceful. She always said when she saved £100, and my father found out, and that was the end of the £100, and she wanted to buy a home. She always instilled in us, the first thing you do when you get married is buy a home. Don't spend your money any other way.
So, how old were you when your mother bought the cake shop, or set that cake shop up?
About 7.5 to 8.
And you lived in Springfield Avenue then?
No, we hadn't come. We still lived at Bondi.
Oh, yes.
And they sort of went back and forth for a couple of months, and then we moved back into Springfield Avenue.
Into what sort of accommodation?
Into flats, small flats. I think they were 2-storey. Martin Hall was the name of the flats. And then we watched, next door was, I don't know whether that was where Corinthia went up. We watched Corinthia, yes it was. We watched Corinthia built, which was about 10-storey building, actually the first of the high-rise in that area, and the other side was called number 9 Springfield Avenue, and that was a first-class boarding house. Springfield House, the elegant Springfield House, I don't know whether it was flatheads, whether it was a boarding house or what it was, but I know I used to play with the boy Peter Peters, and when I hear that name in the football these days, I wonder whether there's any relation, because he always used to like to chase us and try to tackle us. I don't know whether he went to Cranbrook or Shaw, but this is the sort of thing. There were poor people and wealthy people living side by side, and but you went in, you closed your door, and nobody spoke to anybody.
And did the kids play in the street there?
Not really. There was never enough children to really say play in the streets. We'd go into each other's flat and talk, and and we'd walk round the area. When you say play in the streets, well, perhaps we did in a different way. We'd walk. We'd walk down to Elizabeth Bay, we never walked to Rushcutters Bay because there could be nasty men around Rushcutters Bay in the park there, but you'd walk down Roslyn Street and Billiard Avenue, and you'd go into Elizabeth Bay House, which was empty and had not been restored by anyway. You could go up the stairs and live in a fantasy world of thinking. I always used to imagine up the top of the stairs, which later became a caretaker's room, and we were chased out this day. Always remembered that door never opened, and I used to imagine that there was a a man of the 18th century, you know, with the wig and the pants and, you know, with all the fralas of the period, because I did love, and I still love, historical romances. And I never saw the ghost on the stairs that they said goes up, the lady that comes up the stairs. I never saw her. But it
must have had some wonderful adventures there.
Oh, yes. And never hurt anything. I mean, there was never any thought of vandalism or anything. We still respected the property. And then we'd go down to Elizabeth Bay, and there was a small wharf there. And the Alexis Albert had Boomerang on the left, facing north. And when the tide was out, we'd try to walk along the sand and paddle. But there would always be someone come out from Boomerang to shoo us off. And it was quite a... we weren't doing any harm. We just wanted to walk along from the wharf and perhaps paddle, because you couldn't... People did swim off the wharf, the other side, the park side, but we knew that sharks had taken the dog. So you never went swimming with dogs, and they always say, even to this day, never go swimming because a shark is attracted to a dog.
Just a minute. Down to the harbour with?
Well, there was a little girl that lived in the same flats at one stage, and then moved to flats 2 doors away to what is known as Carisbrook. And she used to go with me, and she was a brilliant girl. She ended up... Oops.
Stop. Yeah, if you just clip it up.
A little girl from Carisbrook, and she was a lot younger than me, but she was a very brilliant child, and she later became a doctor. But her aunt and uncle were doctors and school teachers, so I mean she came from she was brilliant, and so therefore, although I was about 3 or 4 years older than her, our mental ability was the same. She moved to a place called Royston Place, and Royston Place is up King's Cross Road. It's like a cul-de-sac, sort of. And the wonderful times were when Empire Night, when this one particular night, everybody sort of shared their crackers, because I had no crackers. We couldn't afford crackers even. I mean, this was getting into the Depression at the hit, and they all shared it, and that night was like a wonderland to kids, because everybody shared them, and some very wealthy people had thrown in, things. There were a lot of people, a lot of girls that had uncles in those days, so the uncles were mum's boyfriends. So, but even though this went on, I never realised this. It was their uncle, you know, and...
So, the cross, you knew how you said you went walking around the cross?
Yes. We never went into Brome Street. We never went west of Victoria Street.
Right. Why was that?
Because that was sort of where the ladies of the town and people like that. And
so that was still, there was still sort of prostitution and that sort of thing?
Oh, there was prostitution and that there. Because I know that Mum had said about some person that a woman had had a tragedy, and the prostitutes that lived next door were very good to them. And my mother always brought me up to believe that I must never look down on a prostitute, because she made, or they made, made life safe for other women, and they were usually there through a married man. That was her, in those days, it was like a girl that had been taken down by a married man, and that's how they got into that sort of profession.
So I had a funny notion that didn't exist up at the cross at that time, but I'm obviously completely wrong.
Oh, it existed, but it wasn't obvious, because I know from what my family have told me, but you didn't see women on the street. I mean, I, as a girl, could walk up and down those streets without any problems at all. It was, but Mum used to say, the locals know the locals. It's the strangers that come in that they touch. But it was safer and better than living in a suburb.
It sounds a very urbane kind of existence.
Oh, very. It was I was a very lonely child, really. And I just sort of fantasised, you know, one minute I was going to be an opera singer, and of course I can't sing, and the next thing I was going to be a pavlova, and, you know, sort of, you lived in a real fantasy world. And then when life hit you later, I remember Mum saying to me when I had my first child, "Oh, you don't know what life's all about." And I didn't.
Yet you've been raised at the cross.
I'd been raised at the cross. And girls, like, when I then went to Burwood School, like the 4th year, some of the girls weren't allowed to come and visit me because they had to come through the cross. It had a reputation then, and yet it was so mild. No man ever accosted me. No man ever followed me. I could go and shop and do all those things and be quite safe. I'd go home from the shop at dark to the empty flat, you know, like a latchkey child. That was the nights when nobody was on duty those were on duty and the girls were out. So I'd have to go home. I could walk along Darlinghurst Road quite safely.
But you said, your mother warned you that it was the strangers who came to the area that were the problem, and that the locals knew the locals.
Yeah.
So in the 20s, the cross was still a place where the strangers would come for a night out, or...
Oh, yes. I don't know whether it's the Crest Hotel. I don't know what was fascinating about the cross. Not really. My sister loved the cross, my youngest sister. She moved back to the cross after Mum died. When we sold the house at Bellevue Hill, she moved into Franconia, which was another one of the tall units that were built in that period, like after Springfield Avenue. That was in the top of Maclay Street. Well, they have always been, that's company title, so therefore, you know, you sort of, being company title, you pick, and they always had keys to the front door, and so nobody could, you know, come in up the street. Although, even in those days, I've known at Corinthia and that, for someone to come in and steal the whole carpet in the night of this long hall. And nobody ever saw them because we had lifts. You got in the lift, you said, "How do you do?" or "Good morning." And that was the sum total of your conversation with most of the tenants.
So how did you meet this little girl that you used to go down to the water with?
Oh, well, the mother was at home all the time, so she sort of, I think they had compassion on me.
Mm-hmm.
And they always knew she was safe with me because I was such a sensible child. Oh, you know, it wasn't funny. Never did anything wrong, you know, sort of, I was too frightened to. I was always told, if you do anything wrong, we'll get the police. And to this day, I still inwardly shake when I said the police. It's something that inbuilt.
Okay.
Oh, you got no idea.
Was your mother strict?
Oh, very strict. Because, you see, you can't do like other people do. Because if you do anything, your father's family will say, you know, what else would you expect?
Oh, and that she was a bad mother, or...
Yes, and she was the most wonderful mother. She died at 90 and a half, and she was one of those women that she used to like to listen to Bandstand because she knew what the young were thinking, and so she wasn't going to be left behind. And to keep up with as each generation, because she'd come from the horse and buggy stage to, well, not even the horse and buggy stage, to, an atomic age. And unfortunately, the computer age has left me behind. I thought I'd be the same, but no way. I can't. It's too fast for me now.
Yeah. Computers leave a lot of people behind, I think.
Oh, yes.
So this little girl, she lived in the flats?
In the flats, yes. And
how big were the flats? They'd be quite large.
They were 3 bedroom. They were 2 bedroom and a closed-in veranda. Like it was called the veranda. There was a lounge room and a kitchen, large enough for a dining room table, and that sort of kitchen dining room, a bathroom, and then the bedroom, a long hall, and then you came to the lounge room, another bedroom, and more or less a sleep-in. So Mum had the glass-in veranda, and we had 2 of us had one double bed, and my other 2 sisters had the other double bed till one sister got married. So she got married from Corinthia around about 1932. We moved soon, about 31. We moved around about soon after that area, that period. I mean, from that area back to Bondi and then Bellevue Hill. Yes.
Right. So you lived there across the 20s, didn't you?
Oh yes, yes. Except for about 12 months at North Bondi. I lived from the time I was born to 1935.
Oh, 1935.
One of the interesting characters was King's Cross Theatre used to be, on Sunday night, used to occasionally let their theatre out for different people. And we had an American evangelist come out, and I'm pretty sure his name was Van Eck. And he hired the theatre for a few Sunday nights. So my mother, silver coin collection, and my mother went, and she thought it was 3pence worth of entertainment. It was clever entertainment. So I was allowed to go one night, and I loved every bit of it, because the crowd sort of used to come up from Woolloomooloo. Well, we always said Woolloomooloo, and all these boys would come up, all sort of gangs of boys, and they would get rowdy. So he'd yell, "Clear the gallery," and the police were there, sort of, and they'd clear. And as they went out one door, they came in the other door. The same people came in the other door. So this night in particular, the night I was there, he just cleared the gallery, and the same lot had, come back in, and he said, "Now, boys, what hymn would you like?" And sort of so the witch from the gallery said, "Hallelujah," and he beamed. He thought, I am going to get a hymn, I'm not going to get any interjection. And then he said, "Hallelujah, I'm a bum." That was the song of the period, and you just had to, it just brought the "Hallelujah, hallelujah, I'm a bum, hallelujah, hallelujah, bum again," something like that it went. And it was something that sort of was very, updated in that period. And so consequently he, that was just one of those things that really amused me, and I've never forgotten. Because he had his angels, and his angels were all dressed in white down to the ground, and some of the women were, 15 to 20 stone. And he had, at certain periods, he had their baptismal, where they were dunked in the water and things like that. But and some of them who didn't put their threepence in put little pebbles in, because they didn't have the money.
Was this in the Depression?
In the Depression. Yeah, in the 30s. Oh, yeah, in the 30s it'd be. Because I think we were still in the shop. That's why...
When was your shop opened from? What years?
About, it must have, I don't know, if I was 7, I'm trying to think. The Queen opened... the Queen Mother opened Parliament House in 1927. Well, it was before that.
And
because I used to have to travel from the Cross by Stevens coaches or buses to North Bondi School and back, because Mum wouldn't take, even though we lived there, Mum wouldn't, thought that the air in the daytime out of Bondi did my health good.
And so you were there from before 1927 to about 1935?
Yes.
And
yes.
you sold the shop then in 1935?
Yes. Oh, well, they stopped parking in front of our shop.
Oh.
Like, the shop would have gone about 1932, 33. And they stopped parking, and of course we used to take £100 on a Saturday night for suppers and that. From the fight crowd at the stadium, and so that was, and the business just went with the Depression. And Mum used to, another thing Mum used to do, the derelicts, or I don't mean the derelicts, the people that were having problems from the Willimaloo area that used to come up from that area around the caves that are there around Willimaloo Bay. There are caves, that's where the convicts used to hide in the early days. They used to come up for food, and Mum used to have these cellophane bags, and the stale scones, which we couldn't sell, she would put into these bags. And what would happen was they'd come in and she'd give them a bag of stale scones, and some people would be so very grateful. We couldn't afford to give away the cakes, and even I didn't get them because Mum said you don't eat the profits. My sisters used to get me one every now and then, but I could always have stale scones, and so there were a couple of men that came up, and when they found they got stale scones, went out the door and threw them in the gutter. So Mum used to slide the window back after she gave them to see, what they did with it. And if they threw it in the gutter, she'd go and retrieve it straight away, so that some other poor fellow might be, and the others would be so grateful for the scones. Because in the Depression, in those days in the Depression, a lot of them didn't have any money or anything, till food rationing came. Like they gave them, not food rationing, till they gave them food coupons.
So the shops, after 1932, when they stopped the parking...
we lost all the business trade.
Right, so you struggled on for another 2 or 3 years to...
I'll say we struggled on for a year because the rent was... We were on a 10-year lease, so we couldn't just get out. And it was about £15 a week, which was an enormous rent. And I think we sold it eventually to sergeants, and Mum felt, thank goodness. And, well, I tell you when the period would be, it'd be round about the time when the government's savings bank closed, when Jack Lang closed the banks.
And that's when you
Yeah, because we had trouble getting our money out of the bank to live. Because, you know, all our money was in the bank. And then we were allowed to, they had it that you had to pick up the money on a Thursday. And so at say 2 o'clock, well, anybody in the job couldn't get to the bank the Thursday, so therefore you had to be unemployed. And according to how much money you had, the maximum you were allowed was £2.10 to draw out a week. I remember a girl at school being very upset because they'd lost all their money, and it was £7, and that to them was a lot of money. So that's when I'm speaking about the poverty and the rich in you know, a small area.
You know, getting back to that earlier phase and the girl that you used to play with,
yes.
What did her parents do? This is, say, in the 20s. This would be the...
I really don't know, because Mum had a boyfriend.
Oh, an uncle.
She had an uncle.
Right.
And I called kept her.
Right, I see. And...
I didn't realise what it was all about till in retrospect. And he was the editor of a newspaper.
And tell us about some of your adventures, what you and that girl...
Well, not really much, except going down to Elizabeth Bay and...
Why was it that the people at Boomerang wouldn't let you walk along the beach?
I never knew why. You see, it's only a sandy beach when the tide's out from about here to there. From here to the wall, you know, about 8 or 9 feet.
Who owned it?
Alexis Elbert, the music people.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
And they didn't own that, did they?
Huh?
They didn't own that beach.
Well, not as far as I was concerned, but they chased you off.
And what about at Elizabeth Bay House?
Well, only once were we chased off. We'd wander around and, you know, because they didn't restore it till after the war, I don't think. You know, I don't think so. I don't exactly know when it was restored, but I know that the National Trust, I think, has it, and it's beautifully restored, and the furniture that's being put in, you know, according to the period, is lovely.
Did lots of local kids play there?
I don't think so. I don't know. See, the point was, there was King's Cross Road. You know, King's Cross Road sort of, that divided it towards the Rushcutters Bay crowd. Well, there were more children in the Rushcutters Bay area. Down the hill there was Boundary Street and that sort of... one of the saddest things I always felt was a nice girl had gone to a school called Shirley in Edgecliff Road, and the people had to take her away, and they sent her to school with us. And of course, you know, she was beautifully spoken and so different to a lot of the Darlinghurst crowd, because Darlinghurst was very mixed, you know, a bit of how are you, and, you know, a bit of oh, how are you? And that was the sort of type. And but I was still in contact with one of the girls. I went to school there. She lives down at Bateman's Bay. But and then there was Surrey Street. You didn't go into Surrey Street. Oh no, Surrey Street was a no-no. Why, I don't know, but it was just whatever happened, you know. And then in Victoria Street there used to be a family of merchants, and they always used to stand at the front door and watch everybody go by as if they had nothing to do. And even down...
What was their name?
Merchant.
Oh, I don't know the name.
No, they were a family, and they lived somewhere in Victoria Street towards St Vincent's Hospital way, and they used to always, you know, be standing at the front door, and of course the rest of the other side of King's Cross, it was really a point of a dividing line. the Potts Point, King's Cross. Now, another girl that went to school with me, her father had Lucky Jim's lottery shop in William Street. And Lucky Jim's, he used to sell sixpenny shares in lottery tickets when the lotteries came out, and her name was Beale, and she lived in Springfield Avenue. I don't know the name of the flats, but it was on the corner of the lane, and the lane to the north, and she was very upset because when I put down what street? Post office as Darlinghurst. She said, "Why didn't you put Potts Point in?" Excuse me. But the point was that all the mail came through William Street, and the postal address was Darlinghurst. There was no Potts Point post office in those days. So you automatically said, because there was Darlinghurst went from Potts Point postal address to way over to practically to Moore Park.
Right, and people preferred to say they came from Potts Point.
Yes. And of course this girl later, she was in my class at school, and her brother went to the Sydney Tech High School, and he later became member. I think the father became a member of Parliament for the South Coast, and Jack became member too. So
it's quite a mixed crowd there, isn't it?
I don't know. Sir Tristan Antico, he went to Darlinghurst Public School, and when the 100 years was up, he gave scholarship to the school, not necessarily for the ducks of the school, but for the one that they could see going through, right through to university. That was in 83. So he was one of them that had, he said when he came there with the name like Tristan Antico, he got a very bad time because of his unusual name.
You know the shops along King's Cross then, what sort of shops were they? The retail area along
yes, there were men's shops. There was Dr. Eakin. He had a house just near, the theatre, picture theatre. And then there were lots of terraces along there. And where the Arabian coffee shop is now, that was a terrace, and they built, see, these terraces, a lot of the terraces had cellars that, like with the English terraces, you went down the steps from the front. Well, what they did, they built the shop out to the, usually it was iron railings, out to there, and opened up the Arabian coffee shop downstairs in what had been the cellar. And if you look there now, you will see that the old terraces are still up above them. But there were mainly all terraces along there. And then I don't exactly know what was there, on the corner of King's Cross Road and Victoria Street, because you've got to get mixed because the roads cross. When they pulled that building down, which would be in the 1920s, there were so many rats and that in those buildings that they tunnelled under the cross, and of course some came up in our shop. And we had lots of trouble of putting in fresh concrete, and the health inspectors were wonderful, you know. And in the end, we had to get the wire and everything. You put the concrete down today, and by the time you came to work in the morning, they'd eaten through the concrete.
Gee, and what building was that they knocked down?
I think they might have been terraces. I don't remember. I remember the building coming up and the story of the rats tunnelling under, and Mum having you know, sort of, because he said we had the cleanest shop in the Cross, in the food line, and opposite us there was a ham and beef shop, and then further along on the left-hand side going towards Macleay Street there used to be a card shop, and I spent about 3 weeks trying with my sixpence trying to buy what card I would give my mother for Mother's Day, and I still to this day reckon there was more love and affection went into that 1 sixpenny card, which was all my money, to buy her a Mother's Day card than anything I ever gave her later when I could afford it.
Was the Cross at that time a place where people came? Were the shops open late at night, and did people come to walk around there and to shop?
Not much. We had electioneering. It was a great place on the corner there for electioneering campaigns. When we had the cricket test, they used to have a broadcast type of thing, and the people would congregate at the Victoria Street side of the Cross, like where the crest is, and they would congregate there, and they would broadcast, and they had Rickety Kate, you know, when a wicket fell, Rickety Kate was the noise, here's Rickety Kate, which meant a wicket had fallen.
Oh, yes.
And, you know, things like that. And that also used to be at one stage just round the Victoria Street where the hansom cabs used to stop to be picked up, also taxis. And one of the people, when we lived at Potts Point, took me in a hansom cab for some reason down, and that was the thing of my life. I'd been driven in a hansom cab, you know, but that was just something.
Before you said, when I asked you, you know, about playing in the street, you said, well, you mostly walked around. So did you walk around and look at the houses or the...
Yeah, well, we'd look at the new buildings that were going on, you know, where different... It was then becoming a flat. They were starting to build flats there. And
were they knocking down terrace houses to do that?
Probably. But there were some magnificent homes. One of the magnificent homes was on where Alamein Fountain is. Oh, I can't think of the name of the people. That was a beautiful, magnificent home, and it had all that area where the Alamein, that was all part of their home. And that didn't go till, after the war, I don't think. It was always there when they made that park there. And there were all terraces down to Elizabeth Bay. There were some high-rise buildings on the crest of the hill.
And were they sort of quality buildings for wealthy people to occupy?
Yes.
Or were they...
Yes, especially down Elizabeth Bay. You know, Billiard Avenue and those places were all beautiful homes.
Oh, well. Interview with Glad Willis, 2nd of September 1994. Have you got your mic on, Glad?
Oh, oops. How long has it been off?
I can't remember what we were talking about.
We're going to talk about the Cross.
Oh, yes.
The theatre.
The theatre. Yeah, what did you do for a good time? I believe you went to the theatre.
We went to the theatre every Saturday. We had our sixpence to go in, and we saw such things as what's her name, Pearl, and Jackie Coogan and Rin Tin Tin, and all these serials. We'd have and we'd have community singing. Community singing, and
what's that?
Community singing? Well, they would put up on the screen the words of songs, and the organist would play the music, and we'd sing along.
And who did you go with? You're saying we. Who's we?
Oh, well, probably the little girl next door. I'd go on my own. Mainly, I think I went on my own, but I just felt all the children around us used to go, like from all areas came to the theatre, and some of the boys would misbehave and throw sticks, and you think those rotten kids, you know, sort of looked down on them, didn't know how to behave, and they stopped you from hearing properly. There'd be a scruffle in the aisle or something like that. That used to go on with a couple of the boys that get a bit raucous at times.
Were they the Woolloomooloo kids?
Well, we call them the Woolloomooloo kids, but they mightn't have been. They might have been the Surrey Street kids or the Rushcutters Bay kids. We wouldn't know, but it was just that there seemed to be that element round Woolloomooloo that sort of we on the hill looked out on the valley.
Tell us about the Woolloomooloo kids.
I really don't know that much, except that they were very witty. The sort of type of kids that you would find, like the adults on the hill at the cricket ground. That was the same sort of wit that they had. They always had an answer. And I mean, some of them went to school, like the boys in the school, but the boys used to go to school in the early days with no shoes and socks and holes in their pants. And when you went to school that had a uniform, you just felt that you were just a little bit above that. And when I used to go to school, that's another thing. I used to, Mum would give me the penny, sometimes to go on the bus to school. And I could buy a dozen thorny mandarins for a penny. So I'd buy the dozen thorny mandarins and walk home. I never cared about my mother having to pay for shoe leather. That never hit me, but I got my fruit, by my dozen thorny, they're tiny little thin-skinned mandarins. But the Woolloomooloo kids, they were sort of, it was just that we felt that they were there. And there was more the
Surrey Street kids?
Beeper?
The Surrey Street kids?
Well, yes, but one of my friends I'm going to give you is one of the Surrey Street, so he'll tell you about Surrey Street.
Okay.
And his son recently died, who was a doctor, so, I mean, now I've sort of gone up the track where I wanted to say something that was along your line of... the
Woolloomooloo kids?
No, cut out the Woolloomooloo kids. The picture crowd, we'd go to the pictures every Saturday.
The people that came into your shop?
People that came into our shop. Oh, they were interesting. One was a Mr. Rudd. And Mr. Rudd, I had said to Mum, he's a nice fellow, because he always said hello to me. And, she said, he's of no consequence, And recently I read that he had left his wife in the country and had a room in King's Cross, so that's why my mother called him of no consequence, even though I knew he was an author. And of course he was the author of on our selection of a Steel Rudd. So that was one. Then there was, we had business dealings with, not Vice Admiral, who had a beautiful home down, like the quarters down Elizabeth Bay Way, Admiral Evans. Now, Evans's wife had been a lady-in-waiting to the Queen of Holland, and he was a thorough gentleman. We did make sandwiches and that for some of their parties, and when he would come into the shop, he was always lovely to my mother, and he would make his sons raise their hats on that to Mum if he met her in the street. Mum used to say, breeding Will out. He was a thorough gentleman. And he, as I said, he became Lord Evans of Broke later on, through the last war. And there were a few personalities. I don't know who the woman was, but she gave me a book and she'd stuck all these little bits and pieces of cuttings from papers and comic strips and things and gave it to me. And she was one of the other personalities. Now there's another one which is not to really be published was, this is my sister Jean used to tell the tale. She used to come into the shop and she used to say, I am Mrs. Justice, Judah Justice Cohen. And with that she'd get to the counter, and my sister said she used to lift her breast and practically put it on the counter. She always used to take off this from Mrs. Justice Judah Cohen. So that was the difference between what became Lord Evans of Broke to one to the other who had to make herself important. She didn't need to. Like, you know, sort of, that was the... we had probably some of the Razor gang and Crims come in at odd times, but they never worried us. You know, they were always polite if they were. And we were broken in too. And what happened was, as the police went off like each night at a certain time, the policeman would go back to Darlinghurst Jail and back. And in that period, it was 15 minutes. One went up and the other came back, was roughly about 15 minutes to the beat. Well, that's when they broke in, and they, the man and the girl danced in the doorway while the other broke in, but of course we'd taken the money home in paper. We used to wrap it up in newspaper and take it home.
Was there much crime up there?
No.
You know,
crime, mostly the criminals, the Razor gang and that were more down in the brothel areas. Like, I think Brome Street used to be a brothel area. I know there were 2 streets there that ran parallel, and I still think they're still the same streets of brothels.
And what did the Razor gang do? Why were they called?
Oh, well, they used to cut people with razors when they had their fights. And the other one, there was Tilly Devine. She was a very well-known personality. And in Oxford Street there used to be June hairdressing. So my sister Jean went over to get her hair permed, because that was all the great thing in those days, you had your hair permed. And she's sitting there, and in comes Tilly Devine, and Tilly Devine is sort of looking over at Jean all the time, and Jean's getting very, very nervous, and because she was a well-known criminal, Tilly was, and it turned out she wanted her hair dyed the same colour as my sister's, so she never ever saw it there again. But I tell you, she had some very nasty moments while this woman was eyeing her off.
Was Tilly Devine really that terrible? What did she do? What was she involved in?
Everything, I think.
I've heard good stories about her too.
Have you? Yeah, well...
helping the neighbours and...
Well, she might have.
But I've never heard actually what she... I don't know what she did.
I don't exactly remember what she did. But I think I don't know whether she sort of had something brothel, and she was a criminal. She definitely was a criminal. But what she really did, I don't really know, because we never had drugs in those days. So whether it might have been soliciting, it might have been anything.
Well, was it very bohemian? Were there many artists and people like that around?
There were, but you didn't come up across them. The best artist I knew, and he was classical, was Isidore Goodman. He lived in Springfield Avenue. He was a tall, lean fellow, and I don't think he really liked children, because whenever I sort of tried to say hello to him, he sort of ignored me. But then after one day, sort of he'd walk past, these, as much as had these kids, and but I think the last time I saw him, he smiled at me, and I thought that sort of made up for all the things. I knew he was a well-known pianist, but I never knew till years later that he became quite a famous pianist. So, no, there was sort of...
and what about painters?
Mary Gilmore, one of Mum's friends, Mrs. Bradstreet, she was a bit of a different sort of personality, and she was a friend of Mary Gilmore's. And then there the Malloys, they used to come. Lily Malloy, the daughter was in one of the first Australian films, and the Malloys used to come to play cards at our place they did it alternatively, you know, sort of, that was what you did, you played cards. And then...
Were you included in that as a child?
No, but I could sometimes, because I was pretty good at cards. And then there was Joan, another girl that was in the same flats, was Joan Pierce, and her mother had a hairdressing shop just near where the old William Street post office, which is the top right, which is part of the expressway, or cut through now, and her mother had the hairdressing shop, and she, her name was Peart, the boy's name was Peart, but Joan was absolutely a beautiful girl, and she married the rather notorious fellow Doyle, who, I don't know, he went to jail for 10 years, I think, and she opened a shop round in Paddington, and I think it was an antique or something shop in that area. But they lived in the same flats as us, and it was lovely. I used to like going into her place because they had a pianola, so we'd sit there and play the pianola and sing all the Maid of the Mountains and all those sort of songs. Couldn't sing a note, but still, you know, that was one of the way I learned the piano, and that was another thing.
Who taught you?
Mrs. Mayhew, she lived in rooms with her daughter, and she was a very nice woman, and her daughter was beautiful. So there were a lot of beautiful girls around at that time.
Were there any painters living in the neighbourhood?
Not that I knew of.
Authors? They had writers?
Only Steele Rudd. But see, we just didn't... See, in some of the parts, they did mix. Like if you were in Surrey Street, you mixed with everybody, you know, sort of. They played on the streets. But just in our place, it just wasn't the thing to do.
Were you allowed to play with the Woolloomooloo kids?
Oh, they never came near us. I wouldn't have been allowed, because I remember one girl at school lived down in Stanley Street, and I was not allowed to go down to her place. You know, no, that was, you know, east is east and west is west, and never the twain shall meet. Did
you ever have any run-ins or fights with them or anything like that?
No.
Well, and if not,
I was too. You know, I was a baby. It's a wonder I didn't. But I just had to toe the line, and I towed the line.
Did other kids? Were there ever
Oh, I can remember at Nook Bondi they said I was an old grandmother, and that was the sort of, you know, because in other ways I was really too sensible for my age. I've been living with older sisters and that, you know, there was never that. And if I'd asked my sisters anything that I wanted to know for school, they'd say, "Don't you know? You should know that. Well, you go and find it." But I didn't discover till years later. They didn't know, but they weren't going to let me have the option of saying, you know, that was the attitude.
Must be sad.
You were fighting for knowledge.
And we were a sad kid.
I really wasn't sad, because that was just my life, and I accepted it. But I bucked with my sisters, you know, because I'd always be having rows and with them, and I'd call them by their full name. You know, they'd get you, Ellen Mary Coburn, you know, sort of. And even with my children, I used to give them their full name. When they got their full name, they knew Mum was cranky.
Gosh. That's an idea. Oh dear. You know, at the so for a good time, you would, you know, for fun, you'd be able to go to the cinema on Saturday afternoon.
Yes.
You might go down to the water and go for a bit of explore around the neighbourhood.
Yes. And
you wouldn't go to Woolloomooloo.
No. I used to often walk across down William Street and go to the National Art Gallery. I used to like browsing around there, and especially when I learned a bit how to pick things doing art at school. I still like to go to the art gallery for different things, but I'd go into all the big celebrations, like we used to have, floats and things like that. And of course, in my period, we had the opening of the bridge, which we marched over the bridge and back in pouring rain. And on the 60th, I walked over the bridge and back. Not my 60th birthday, the 60th anniversary of the bridge. I'd go into all these things and line up and see all the celebrations and anything like that. And see, we lived in Corinthia, and we had a wonderful vista from our back flat. We overlooked all Sydney, overlooked Hyde Park, the Domain. We saw the bridge being built, and at that time the ferries before the bridge was built, the ferries used to seem to be going, and it was like a fairyland even in those days, more so I think than it was more. Today it's more a static fairyland. In those days it was more like a moving fairyland, because there was so many small ferries on the harbour, more sort of running frequently, because you'd have to come across Sydney by punt before the bridge, and you might, if it was a bad day, you might wait 2 hours to get on that punt to get one across, because of bad rain. This was as the cars were starting to get more popular, and and
cars would go on the punt.
Yeah, the cars would go on the punt. And the tram, there used to be a turnaround of a tram. I'm not sure whether, the turnaround in the tram was in Victoria Street, and it used to run to Wynyard. Like, the tram used to go from Watson's Bay through the cross down William Street. And then for a while, about 1932, 33, they had the tram used to come up near the King's Cross Theatre, and they'd turn it around, and it would go down to Wynyard. That was after when they opened the Harbour Bridge. And I think it used to go to Erskine Street, and you'd get out sort of there, and the other tram used to go to Erskine Street, but this would go to Wynyard and back. And so you had the trams that you could go to town in, that you would pick up in Victoria Street instead of having to go over to Bayswater Roadside to get it.
And so you had quite an area where you could roam. Like, could you go and play in the Botanical Gardens or the Domain?
Well, we sort of didn't play.
Did you wander around them? Oh,
yes.
And you were allowed?
I was allowed. I'd come home and be asked where I'd been and what I'd done. And I remember going to the Mitchell Library when I was about 16. I wanted to find out our family history. And Mum said to me, "Where have you been?" And I said, "I've been to the Mitchell Library." And she said, "Why?" I said, "I want to find out about our family." And she said, "You're not to go there again, looking through that." So I just sort of, in those days you just played it by ear, you just didn't do anything. So then when a bit later you'd say, "Mum, why can't I go? What's the reason?" "Oh, well, there's a convict in the family." And in those days a convict was a terrible thing to admit to. And I'd say, when she was 89, she said to me, "You better go and do family history, Glad, because the family could be like the first Mayflowers in America, Mayflower people in America." And I said, "Well, what did he do?" "Oh, I'm sorry, I can't remember." So when she was prepared to tell me, it was too late. But I knew we had the Lansdowne in. I always knew that because when Grandma came over from Melbourne, they went and got a trap and went out to look at it because the trains only went so far. And the fellow said, oh, that was a gun from Ned Kelly. And she said, Ned Kelly was never here. And of course my grandmother married a gardener, so a lot of people thought she'd married the gardener, the bushranger, but she didn't. So it was another gardener. But no, that was, I'd go to the Mitchell Library and I'd browse. I'd go to I read a lot. I still read a lot. And I brought a book home once that was a translation, and I wanted to finish it. There was the public library in the Queen Victoria building where you could take books home, and I took this book home and I was told I wasn't to take any more translations. You had to take that book back. So I got so far into it, and my mother found me reading it the next night. And I had to take it back, and I was told I was never to bring home a book that was being translated because they had different ideas. Well, you see, the idea was that in those days they were all living in a room, and I never had that sort of mind, so I thought nothing of it because my sisters and I shared the bedroom and shared a bed, so I didn't...
And what was the book?
I don't know what the book was. I'd love to have known what it was to find out what it was, but...
And it was translated from what?
Oh, German.
And this wasn't a good...
No, continental people lived different to what we lived. So I wasn't to learn that sort of type of thing.
Right.
So...
were there many immigrants or anything in the cross at that time? Or
only Italians.
And were you allowed to mix
English?
with them?
Oh, they just had the Italians and the Greeks just had the fruit shops. Oh, there was one round the corner near us who sometimes, in our block, before you got to Hampton Court, and he was an Italian, he'd always want to give me a lolly, and I was never allowed to take a lolly from anybody. I was never allowed to do a message for anybody. Because if an accident happened, you know, I would be, what would you say,
held accountable
or something like that, or something could happen to me, and they might say they gave you so much money and they didn't. And
your mother was very cautious.
Oh, extremely so.
But were the Italians viewed as continental, or were they viewed as Mediterranean? Were they?
No, they were just as foreigners. I never heard the word wog. That was only a word that came later. Never knew the word wog.
But certainly the continental influence wasn't to be encouraged.
No. Well, I think she thought that the continental men were more permissive, more likely to interfere with little girls or so. I don't know. I don't know. That's the, in retrospect, that's how I look at it, you know. That I know when my daughter brought home a little Chinese girlfriend, my family didn't like my daughter having a Chinese girlfriend, you know, and but that was the era we were brought up in. The east is east and west is west. Never the twain shall meet.
Was your mother very warm and affectionate to you?
No, not really. But she loved us. You felt safe with her. So there was a safeness about her. And, she sort of... she'd had a very dictatorial mother. So, I mean, my daughter reckons I've been dictatorial too. So, I mean, it must carry on.
In the genes.
In the genes, definitely.
So what were you expressly forbidden to do?
Well, I just had to behave myself.
And be proper and correct at all times? Be
proper and correct at all time, know how to do things properly and all things like that.
Speak correctly?
Speak correctly. No, now I'm getting older, I'll say going or something like that. You had to say going, no slomaky words. when my husband first met me, he thought I was English.
Okay.
And somebody said, "Oh, you don't want to go out with an English girl?" Oh, no, you know. So I did speak beautifully as a child.
Before you made a comment that you were sort of a bit grubby and messy.
I'll compare with what my sisters thought. See, my one sister the point was I was never grubby, perhaps, but I was, what would you say, I was untidy. And I'm still untidy. So my place is either what's the name, or a palace, you know, pigsty or a palace. When I'm into cleaning things, I've usually got every room in a mess. And I've got, doing family history, I've got papers everywhere, you know, sort of trying to work out the continuity and things like that, and I'm paste and papering things, so, or I'm sewing and mending things or doing things like that.
I wanted to talk, you said that you talk a bit about your schooling. You said that you went to St John's at Darlinghurst,
yes,
and that you got sick there.
Yes, well, Mum blamed the old sandstone building, and and I got the croup, and I was in bed the whole winter for the croup. And then we moved to Bondi, and I went to North Bondi School, and I used to travel backwards and forwards every day.
What was the school experience like for you? How did you feel about it?
Well, I was allowed to play with certain people. One day I decided that I would, Mum said she'd be home late and I was to come straight home, so I thought, well, Mum's going to be late today. The school was always asking me in, and I decided to go in. And so consequently, I got nervous and I didn't stop very long, and when I got home Mum, of course, had got home, and don't you dare, you're not allowed to go to anybody's place, and you know, and she was just near the school. Mum never met the girl, but I just wasn't allowed, you know, and I was allowed to play with the girls in the flats, and that was, I was really very restricted in who I could mix with in those days, because Mum was very reserved and she didn't understand that I was a completely different personality to what she was. So therefore, schooling, and I wasn't going to school in the district that I lived. I was always going to a school out of the district I lived.
And was that just because of the health problems at St John's? Was it St John's?
St John's, Church of England.
Oh, Church of England.
Yeah.
So you didn't go to state schools?
Oh yes, I only went there for a while. Then I went to North Bondi Public School. Then I did almost state school.
Right. And why did you go to schools outside where you lived?
Well, because number one, for my health, and then I went to Darlinghurst School for 2 years. Well, that was in my area. Then to do what I was going to be was a cooking teacher. I then had to go, because I didn't get to Sydney Girls High, and I don't know why I didn't, and so then we went 1 year at Paddington, and then the next year I came to Burwood for 4th year.
At what school did you go to at Burwood?
Burwood Girls High. It was a domestic science school in those days.
And because you wanted to become a cooking?
My mother decided I wanted to be a cooking teacher. I wanted to be a nurse, but I was told I was too lazy. But the whole truth was they couldn't afford to put me through, because in those days a uniform was £33 and you had to keep them. You didn't get money for nursing in those days. It was all, you had to be fairly influential to go. And of course, then eventually I got a job in the Chartered Accountant's office, and I wanted to leave and go behind the counter in David Jones's. I thought that'd be lovely. But no, you're in a job of good standing. And in those days, accountants, solicitors were professional officers. You know what I mean? So I wasn't allowed to do that. I was a frustrated child. And
so you did what your mother told you until you were married?
Yes, till I was married. Even after I was married, when I came home, with a baby. No, well, when I come home with the baby, I joined the Air Force and I married. I met and rang up Sydney and told them I was coming up next week to get married. Told my mother to buy a frock because I was coming up to get married.
Oh, gee, let's turn that over. God. Wait a minute. Okay. Was that your first act of rebellion?
Real act of rebellion, yes.
What was your mother's response?
Oh, well, she just didn't say, because she never met my husband till the day before I got married.
And what did he do? What was his profession?
He was a fitter in the Air Force when I married him. Mm-hmm. He was just an ordinary working tradesman, fitter and turner, that's all he was. But he was a good man, good provider.
Mm. And do you think your mother wanted you working in professional offices because you might be able to marry a solicitor or an accountant or something?
Yeah, I think that. But, I mean, the boys in the Depression years couldn't afford to get married.
Yes. How old were you when you went to work?
16 and a half.
And that would have been in what?
I was in 4th year.
Yes.
Finished 4th year. Mum just couldn't afford to keep me the extra year.
At school?
At school.
Even though it was a state school?
Yes.
And you were travelling from the Cross to Burwood to go to school?
Yes.
And you left, was that 1935, 36?
No, that'd be about 33.
Oh, 33. Right. Mm. And so you worked in an accountant's office
for 7 years, yes.
Goodness. So you were 14.
Joined the Air Force. Mm. Oh, well, you had a job. Mm. And that was the point, you had a job. Mm. And you put up with conditions that were pretty horrific. You know, I mean, it was no 9 to 5 job. Mm. Or 8:30 to 5, because whenever work was done.
Right. Did you have to seek your mother's approval to join the Air Force?
Oh, yes.
And she approved?
At 24? Mm. No, so long as I sent money home.
Oh. What did your mother do after she closed down the...
Nothing.
How did she live?
Well, she did a bit of betting.
Really?
Yeah, that's what I used to do. I forgot about that. Mum was very ill there, you know, so after she came out of the business, she was very ill for a couple of years there. So she used to bet on the horses, and she was very tinny. And I used to have to she'd go up and said a shilling each way or 2 shillings each way, and I'd have to have it in my head and go up and tell the woman what it was and come back, so that there'd be no papers or that. It was all done with my memory.
Was this SP booking?
SP booking.
Yeah.
And one day I got there and they'd been raided, but I had to go home and tell Mum they'd been raided.
Where was this?
Somewhere in King's Cross Road. No, in some place in Darlinghurst Road.
Really?
Yes.
Your very proper mother was betting with an SP bookie.
Yes, and that eventually meant we were able to afford to buy a car.
Did she study the form guide?
Yes. And then there was some... Oh, yes, there was an interesting person lived in Corinthia. His name was Mr. Swindler.
What do you mean?
No, that was his proper name.
Yes.
And he did do... Whether this is where swindling came from, I don't know. He was an American, had a beautiful wife, and she was lovely. And they used to go out, and when the horses were running, Mum would go meet them out there, and she would get extra tips and sort of make a bit of money. So all of a sudden he did a bunk to America and left this beautiful wife behind, and he'd swindled a lot of money. So, I mean, whether that's where the word came from, I do not know, but his name was Mr. Swindler.
Was that that would have been in the Depression?
That was in the Depression.
Mm.
So it was before 35. We left in 35.
Where did you move to in 35?
Back to North Bondi.
Oh, right.
Mum did it, she went out for a trip in the tram and thought, oh yes, she'd like to be back here with the air and the sea, and so she came home and went to an agent, and these flats were being built, and we had the pick of the flat we wanted. We were the first tenancy. But she was psychic.
Really?
I'm sure she was.
Did she say she was?
No, she had told me that somebody had said she'd made a good medium.
Oh.
But she didn't. But my grandmother used to read the cards.
And when you had to, and did she ever practice anything like that, or?
Oh no. Oh no. When I told her I was going to a fortune teller, I was told you mustn't say anything because don't give them any leads. And I sat there and I was as terrified as ever. So. No.
What was the name of the SP bookie?
I wouldn't have a clue. They were husband and wife.
And did you have to sort of go there discreetly, or was it?
Oh no, I just walked in and out, but I had it was all in my head, so nobody could. There were no papers on me.
Right.
Because Mum probably would have got into trouble for me doing it, but at least it gave us comfort.
And it helped you survive.
Yes, helped us survive. Helped pay the rent.
Well, was that what? Was she doing it because she enjoyed it, or because to pay the rent?
No. She because later on she never did it.
So it was a means of survival.
A means of survival, yes.
Right.
As a child, we used to go over to Oxford Street to where they used to auction the meat at 2 and 6 a tray. Yes, they used to auction meat.
Why was that?
Well, in the Depression, so they could sell the meat, they'd have these trays, and it'd be 2 and 6 a tray, and they would be at the door, and you'd have to go and pick the best tray that had the most meals. But
why do you call it auction when the price was set? You're saying
well,
it's
the
2 and
price
6.
was set, but you'd have to pick.
Oh.
Like, they'd bring one tray out and everything, and you'd wait till you thought the tray had more value on, or more meat on. There'd be more sausages or more chops, or the leg of lamb was a little bit bigger.
Oh, I see.
And it'd always be about 2 and 6 they called the trays. And then you go down William Street and to the vegetable shops, because the cross shops were too expensive, and you get, say, the biggest cabbage for 6pence. That'd do 3 meals, or and you'd save the papers, and you'd get take the papers up and sell them to the fruit shop for a shilling, and you'd take a shilling's worth of potato. You get 8 pounds of potatoes for a shilling.
Did you eat well in?
Yes, we ate plain, but it was well. We'd get speck fruit. We'd take a suitcase up.
To where?
I would. I'd be the one that had to do this of a Sunday morning, and of course at the Italians in those days, they only had the most perfect fruit, and that's all you could sell. You couldn't sell anything with a blemish in those days, and so we'd get a suitcase full of speck fruit. And
from who?
From the Italians shops.
Oh, in the cross.
In the cross, mainly the one on the corner of Maclay Street.
Well, I want to ask you. You said that it was too expensive to shop in the cross. So, if you had a fruit shop in the cross, who would you be selling
they were
to?
The wealthy people that paid.
Oh.
I mean, I live here, and you'd be surprised. 7-Eleven up there is shockingly dear, but you see families going in, and and you think, why? When you've got the shops down the road to get the cheaper things. So it was the same setup, that people that were too lazy to move paid the price.
Right. So they were catering to the more wealthy clientele.
That's right. So we go down William Street, we go down Oxford Street, and sort of get our groceries over at McElrath's in Oxford Street. But there you often got, with an order, a bag of lollies. McElrath's used to do that. So that's, you know, but that was like the food. That's how we survived, by very keen shopping, and now I'm not a keen shopper at all.
Well, where did most people work who were living up at the Cross?
Mainly in offices.
Professionals?
Yeah, professional. Well, it was more or less professional in those days. You know, I mean, the ordinary person worked in factories. Like, there was a class distinction between the factory worker and the office worker and the wealthy.
And yet you all lived in the same neighbourhood?
Yes. It was a very mixed neighbourhood. Everybody minded their own business. Nobody, you went in your flat, you said hello, you closed your door, and that was it. And I think it happens in high-rise buildings today.
Did you have holidays?
We sometimes used to go to the hydro, mainly in the good years before the Depression.
Was the hydro expensive then?
I wouldn't have a clue. I don't know. The Mark Boys owned it at the time.
And what did you do there when you went on holidays there?
Bushwalk. Yeah. I always did bushwalking. You know, and my sisters would play tennis, and they were great tennis players, so my eyesight wasn't the right one for that, you know.
Your sisters must have had a pretty good social life.
Oh, they had a wonderful social life. Oh, they were terrific. You know, sort of, there were so many boys around the place because they were three very attractive girls. And then, you know, and I came along the plain Jane of the family. So, you know, sort of, I had these three lovely sisters who, even though they made their own clothes, dressed well. Yeah.
Do you know where they went out and what they did in the 1920s?
Oh, well, you went to the pictures, and the boys always brought you a box of chocolates. And, that was, you know, a box of chocolates. Old gold chocolates was the thing. And then they'd come home and sit on Mum's bed and tell her all the doings of the night.
Oh, they had to be in to report to your mum?
Oh, Mum was always awake to see we came in. Oh, yes, definitely.
What smells can you remember from the Cross in your childhood?
I don't remember any.
Sounds?
Sounds, well, I suppose the sounds of the trams rattling. That was the nearest. The lions roaring from the zoo.
Really?
Yes. You'd hear the lions roar from the zoo when there was a northeasterly wind, and you still will today.
Oh, that's amazing.
Perhaps the boats on the harbour tooting at times. They'd be the main sounds, the trams, the boats, the lions.
Can you describe your mother's working day to me?
No.
No? Because she was out of the house.
Well,
why is that?
In the early period, no. In the later period, she'd be always home or she was always sick. But she survived.
What was the matter? What was her illness?
Oh, well, she had a very enormous gallbladder operation where it took 6 weeks for them to discover what was wrong with her. She was nearly dying. You know, we'd go to Prince Alfred and 1 minute she was dying and we could see her any time, and the next day she was, and this went on for 6 weeks till they did an operation. They found she had 30-odd something gallstones. And it hadn't shown up in the x-rays of the time. And she saw specialist after specialist. She was under Dr. Blackburn, that was the well-known doctor. He became professor, I think, of Sydney Uni later. I think that's the same Blackburn.
Can we sort of stop here? I believe you knew B. Miles.
Well, I knew her by sight. She was really a beautiful style of girl. It was very hard to reconcile her with what she became, because you'd see her just about every day jumping on the tram footboards, jumping on the boards of all the cars had sort of footpads, sort of footboards, to get into a car. And I still miss those to this day. I still think they were a good idea. And she'd be jumping on them, or she'd get there, and when it was pulled up with the traffic outside, more or less outside our shop, she'd just open the door and in she'd get, and then you'd go a little bit further round to where King's Cross Road and Victoria Street, to the top of William Street, or she'd be there. And she was an athletic type of girl, but a fine-looking, I wouldn't say a good-looking girl, but a fine-looking, sort of had a sort of style about her. And later on, years later, when I was in the Air Force, I was going from Bondi to Point Piper, and I happened to get on the tram at Rose Bay, and I sat beside this woman, and she's talking to me, and when I got out, the other Air Force boy said, "Hey, that was B. Miles." I said, "Oh, don't be silly, that's not B. Miles." It turned out later, when I saw a photo in the paper, it was. You couldn't reconcile the beautiful type of girl she was to what she became.
Well, what did she become? See, I've only heard about her.
Well, the family were wealthy. She evidently, the story is, she was at Sydney Uni and she had a breakdown. They couldn't charge her with vagrancy because the family supplied her with an income. She was really a type of vagrant. Mm. And she really did nothing to harm anybody. I mean, she'd get in and hire a taxi and go halfway across Australia. That's the sort of thing she'd do. But she was one of the bohemians of the time, but she just did those sort of things that were out of character to the leftover of the Edwardian, I suppose you'd say, period, to the gay 20s. She was sort of betwixt and between sort of.
So she was eccentric even in the 20s?
Yeah, she was very eccentric.
So she would just get on when she was young and...
Well, evidently she wasn't that till the supposedly nervous breakdown. And but you just thought she was... I don't know whether she was a free lover or anything like that. I don't know anything about that type. But I know that they used to say, only for the income, it stops her from being picked up as a vagrant. And
was that when she was when you were off at the war, or are you talking about when you had the shop?
When we had the shop, she was the tall, lovely girl who jumped on the trams and had a reputation. Mm-hmm. B. Miles is a bit cracked. Right. But by the time she got in the war, by that time, she had become fat and sort of let herself go and everything like that. I don't think she was dirty, but she was sort of slommucky in her dress from the... I always remember her as looking being very tall, but from a child's point of view, she probably wasn't as tall. But this woman in the bus, I just couldn't reconcile the two. Mm. So that was...
What did she talk to you about when you were...
Oh, she didn't talk.
Oh.
Oh, no, she was just there.
Oh.
A personality that everybody in the cross knew.
And she lived around the cross?
She lived around the cross. But she lived everywhere, She sort of... she was a free soul, I think you'd call it.
Mm. Going back to the time when, you were roaming around, and did you ever go down to the shops like David Jones or the big department stores in the city?
We didn't go to David Jones, but we used to walk from Potts Point to Mark Foy's via East Sydney Tech. We'd sort of come up. And at one stage I thought that that there were... it was the old jail, of course, and they used to have the guards' towers, and I always imagined that I'd seen the guards there, but according to the history of East Sydney Tech, I didn't see the guards there. But I always imagined then just near Liverpool Street and Forbes Street on the corner, I remember as a very young child seeing a man that was evidently up a ladder doing something to the lights or the lamps, and I don't know whether they were gas lights or the beginning of electricity, but I never saw anybody there again. I like to think that there was a lamplighter either turning on the gas or putting out the gas. And we'd walk to Mark Foy's, and Mum would do the shopping in Oxford Street. And if we'd get down to Mark Foy's, near the old furniture shop, used to be a sergeant's cake shop. And I would walk miles, and but the only time I played up on my mother was if she wasn't going to get me a penny rock cake. You know, that was something I wanted. And another thing I've just thought of now was one day at Mark Foy's steps, this woman met us, having coming from a broken home, and of course never having money. This woman said to my mother, "Oh, but Gladys tells me her father gives her lots of money." And so she called, Mum called, she said, "Gladys, how much does your father give you?" "A farthing." And so that was lots of money because it was money to me. So that was just, farthings went out soon after that period, I think. I don't...
Well, how much was a farthing?
Farthing, well, there was a penny, and half a penny was a halfpenny, and half a halfpenny was a farthing.
Oh, you're kidding. Oh.
So, the value sort of has gone out of all. You really can't explain what a farthing is, but in some of the old films you'll hear them talk about there is a show that Mr. Kipps, I think, refers to a farthing. You know, sort of, if you know Mr. Kipps. All right. I know it is the film version, that's right. The song, I think, is something about a farthing.
And you were talking about clothes or something before.
Oh, yes. Well, we used to, when we lived in Corinthia, when we wanted to get rid of clothes, we didn't have clothes bins or charities to give to. We used to roll them up in a bundle and throw them down into the lane below, and they would disappear. Now, we always remember my sister Jean had her Jacob's coat. You know, it was one of these jackets of many colours. It was always called the Jacob's coat. And years later, about 10 years later, she saw a woman in town in it, and she said it looked so good. But that was one that had been thrown down into the laneway. They'd disappear. And then, did I tell you about the fishermen?
No.
Well, what used to happen was the fishermen in the Depression, on mainly Sundays, because they knew that more people would be home Sunday morning, they would come up the rear lane, and there's usually about 3 of them, and one would play the violin, and one would sing, and the other would be looking for any donations that would be thrown down. And I used to think their singing was absolutely beautiful. But my mother soon told me, "Gladys, if they were any good, they would be at La Scala, not singing in the street behind us."
Were they Italian?
Yes, Italian fishermen.
From Woolloomooloo?
From Woolloomooloo.
Because the fleet used to come in there, didn't it, at Woolloomooloo?
That's right. We had a lot of Italian, when I think of Italian fishermen in that era, and that's sort of that was it. It was really the main ports. There were no ships coming into Circular Quay. What would go round to Piedmont and round that, I didn't know about, but I know that, a lot of shipping Yeah, that's why all the different types of sailors used to be around Woolloomooloo, and that's why they wouldn't let my sister, because in the old days the tars had as they used to call them, had a very bad reputation.
The what?
Tars. The sailors were called tars.
Oh.
I'm running out of tapes.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Right. I hope you've been interesting and that I haven't talked too much.
It's wonderful.
Too loud.
No, you've been wonderful.
Thank you very much. And everything, and oh,
How much typing do you need, Jocelyn?
that's right. How much typing do you need? I'll get the book and sort of the button
Looking
the button flows on.
Oh, what's that?
This is one of the mild Frankie cat.
We could do something different.
Oh, right. Oh, dear.
Well, we cut them.
A child at Potts Point. I would be about 2 years of age. That's my sisters in the Sydney Girls High A hockey team in 1917, the year I was born. That's your Katoomba. These you can't see. That was the Domain Baths in 1917, but I'm afraid it's faded. And this is my mother at Katoomba in 1923. And this is the photo of Morrison's cat shop.
Oh, wait, hold that still. Wow.
Don't make me laugh. I take terrible photos when I laugh. Well, when I'm not, we mightn't have people swimming in the weir at Willis in 1927.
Yeah.
That's probably gone by now.
No, it's not just getting faster and faster.
No, but I mean that the weir's gone.
Oh,
I
right.
don't know. There's another photo of the weir.
Wow,
Swimming in the
that's
weir
excellent.
at Willis, 1927.
And they're the fish steps that the fish are supposed to be able to go up, Joss, and that's on the Nepean.
Right? So, right. Oh, woman, this is where the street where Morrison's cakes were. The cottage is opposite. I said I thought I had it.
And that's where the factory was?
Factory was opposite.
At Willara?
Yes.
Right. What street is that in Willara, do you know?
Oh, I'd have to get a map to work it out.
Is that your sister?
Yes. That was... No, that's not my sister. That's somebody else. But that was... the lady that lived there used to be very good and used to take them over and give them cups of tea and things like that, which weren't provided at the...
At work?
Oh, no, you didn't get cups of tea at work.
Goodness.
When I worked in the Chartered Accountant's office, no.